If they ever link me to this, remember I was approached, not involved.
This could be the scandal that ends the NBA.
Good morning. Today we are here in New York to announce a historic arrest across a wide-sweeping criminal enterprise that envelops both the NBA and La Casa Nostra.
The biggest scandal the NBA has ever seen is happening right now, and LeBron is right in the middle of all of it. We're not talking hundreds, not thousands, but tens of millions at stake.
And the fraud is mind-boggling. It's not hundreds of dollars. It's not thousands of dollars. It's not tens of thousands of dollars. It's not even millions of dollars. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars in fraud and theft and robbery.
Arrests are already happening, and yes, they include Hall of Famers, current coaches, and star players. And guess what? The FBI has also revealed the 4 Mafia families involved have been secretly controlling the NBA for years. This could change the league forever. Stick around because you haven't seen anything like this. It all started quietly. Just another Thursday morning, until it wasn't. Across the country, people were waking up to the sound of pounding at their doors. And within hours, news stations started buzzing. Federal agents had launched a nationwide operation linked to the NBA. And this wasn't some random sting. This was one of the biggest federal crackdowns in modern sports history, a coordinated sweep that hit 11 states at once. The operation had a name so wild you'd think Hollywood made it up. Operation Nothing But Net. Yeah, you heard that right. By midday, more than 30 people were in custody. Some were familiar names, former players and coaches, people you've seen on ESPN panels. And behind all of it were 2 schemes that sound like something from a movie, but were very, very real. The first scheme? Insider sports betting, and I don't mean the fantasy league stuff everyone jokes about. This one was much deeper. The second was a rigged high-stakes poker ring connected to 4 of the most notorious crime families in the country. And when the indictments dropped, they didn't just name shady bookies or mid-level runners. The documents had names that made NBA fans stop scrolling mid-tweet. When the indictments dropped, the FBI didn't just post a PDF online. They called a full-blown press conference in New York. Agents rolled out boxes of seized evidence, stacks of laptops, and what looked like enough hard drives to power NASA. Yeah, it was that serious. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York started talking about a years-long investigation, extensive coordination across 11 states, and 31 total arrests. But then came the moment that sent the entire basketball internet into meltdown. The FBI director himself, Kash Patel, stepped up to the mic, looked straight into the cameras, and dropped 3 names that nobody expected to hear in the same sentence as the Mafia.
But as you now know, individuals such as Chauncey Billups, Damon Jones, and Terry Rozier were taken into custody today. Former, current NBA players and coaches.
You could literally feel the NBA fan base explode in real time. Patel's words hit like a hammer.
Not only did we crack into the fraud that these perpetrators committed on the grand stage of the NBA, but we also entered and executed a system of justice against...
The room went dead silent for a second, because this wasn't just a gambling thing anymore. The schemes were the insider betting ring and a rigged high-stakes poker network backed by 4 of New York's most infamous crime families.
La Casa Nostra, to include the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families.
The FBI called it spot fixing, which is basically not throwing games outright, but nudging them. A quiet substitution here, a last-minute ankle tightness there, tiny moments that changed betting lines and made certain people a lot of money. You know this case is really huge when the FBI director himself is directly handling it. And here's the scary part. The Bureau said this wasn't a few bad nights, this was years in the making. They'd been tracking it since 2020. From wiretaps to crypto trails and fake offshore accounts, it was all there. By the time the press conference ended, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a scandal. This could literally end the NBA. And at the center of it all were 3 names that once stood for loyalty, hustle, and brotherhood, now tied to the words fraud, betting, and mafia. But what exactly did each of them do? Well, that's where things get dark. Chauncey Billups was the first name that made everyone's jaw drop. The guy was basically basketball royalty, the captain of that crazy 2004 Pistons team that stunned the world by beating the Lakers. He was the calm in the chaos, Mr. Big Shot, the one you trusted when the game was tight and everyone else was losing their head. Players looked up to him. Analysts used him as an example of leadership done right. And after he retired, he became that perfect bridge between eras, turning into an ESPN analyst and then the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers. So when word spread that Chauncey had been arrested in Portland, the shock was instant. This was the guy who preached accountability, who spent years mentoring young players about doing things the right way. Hearing that he was involved in poker games linked to organized crime felt surreal, like the kind of plot twist that just doesn't happen in real life. The court papers said he had joined a series of facilitated high-stakes events, which everyone knows is code for Mafia-run poker tables. And honestly, fans didn't even know what to say. Because it wasn't just the crime itself, it was the fall. Then there's Terry Rozier, one of those guys whose story always felt bigger than basketball. He came from nothing, literally from a rough neighborhood in Youngstown, Ohio, with a dad behind bars and a mom who worked every hour she could just to keep things moving. He made it to the NBA on pure hunger, and that chip-on-the-shoulder energy was what made people love him. Back in 2018, when Kyrie went down and Rozier stepped up in those playoffs, dropping nearly 17 points a night and leading Boston deep into the postseason, he became Scary Terry. Fans were buying shirts, chanting his name, the whole thing. When Charlotte gave him that big contract, it felt like a win for every underdog. So hearing that the FBI had arrested him in Orlando, accusing him of leaking injury and lineup info for betting purposes, felt like someone just sucker-punched the league. And then, there's Damon Jones, the glue guy, the shooter, the friend in every locker room. He was never a superstar, but if you watched basketball in the 2000s, you saw him everywhere. He played for 10 teams in 11 years, a reliable role player, a voice teammates actually listened to. He even hit that huge playoff shot for the Cavs back in 2005 to push them past the Wizards, a moment LeBron never forgot. After retiring, Jones reinvented himself again, becoming a coach and, more importantly, LeBron's personal shooting coach. That's how close they were. Not just colleagues, they were family. So when Damon's name appeared in the indictment, the betrayal part of the story took center stage. The documents tied him to both insider info leaks and poker games that supposedly funneled money through mafia-backed circles. It's the kind of thing that doesn't just ruin reputations, it shakes friendships. In fact, when reporters asked LeBron, you could see it in his face, that disbelief, that sadness.
I can't believe he'd do this after everything, after all the trust I gave him.
And you could feel that. Because in a world where loyalty is everything, that kind of betrayal cuts deep. What makes this all hit so hard isn't just that these guys got named, it's who they were before all this. Billups was the mentor, Rozier was the fighter, and Jones, the brother. 3 totally different paths, 3 different generations, all meeting at this same point where fame, trust, and organized crime collided. And honestly, that's why people keep calling this the darkest chapter in modern NBA history. It's not the headlines or the legal frenzy. It's the fact that these were men who embodied the game's best qualities and now they're accused of some of its worst qualities. If they are eventually convicted, this won't just be a scandal, it'll be a turning point. Because maybe for the first time in a long time, the league will have to ask itself how deep this problem actually goes, and whether it'll be able to survive this. But before anyone says this is the first time something like this has ever happened, let's rewind a bit. Because the warning signs were flashing bright red a whole year before this bust even happened. In April of 2024, Toronto Raptors forward Jontay Porter, Michael Porter Jr.'s little brother, became the first NBA player to get a lifetime ban in over half a century. The reason? He basically turned prop bets into his personal side hustle. According to the league's investigation, Porter had been leaking insider info about his own health, whether he was playing, how many minutes he'd get, stuff that only team staff should know. And then, he'd place bets or have others place them based on that info. It got really suspicious on March 20th when he checked out of a game just 3 minutes in, claiming he was sick. Right after that, one bettor dropped $80,000 on a parlay that predicted Porter would underperform. And of course, that bet hit perfectly. The FBI later uncovered that Porter was in serious debt to a few gambling operators, the kind of people you don't want to owe money to. It wasn't just about cash anymore. There were threats, coercion, and constant pressure. Basically, the same kind of shady ecosystem we're now seeing explode in this current case.
And in at least one instance, they got their information by threatening a current player, Porter, because of his pre-existing gambling debts.
And here's where things get uncomfortable for the NBA. Around that same time, the league had gone all in on betting partnerships. They had deals with DraftKings, FanDuel, Caesars, name it. There were live odds during broadcasts, sponsored betting segments, and even sportsbooks inside arenas. The same organization that banned players for gambling was literally cashing checks from the gambling industry. The irony writes itself. So, after Porter's ban, Commissioner Adam Silver gave one of those polished zero-tolerance statements. But even he admitted it was a wake-up call. He pushed for stricter rules, but also defended the NBA's betting partnerships, saying it was part of modern fan engagement. Fast forward to this recent scandal, and it's starting to sound less like fan engagement and more like open season. And get this, new court filings from the current investigation even hint that Porter's old debt network overlapped with the same gambling circles being raided now. So technically, this whole Mafia scandal has had its fingerprints in the league long before anyone realized. By the time Chauncey Billups was placed on leave and Thiago Splitter was named interim coach in Portland, the conversation had already shifted from isolated incidents to systemic corruption. What started as one player trying to cover his debts might have been the blueprint for how much darker things were about to get. Because if Jontay Porter was the test case, what we're seeing now is the full-scale sequel. And this time, the stakes are way higher. So while the public was still arguing about Porter, the FBI had already been watching, listening, and tracking everything. This wasn't some last-minute scramble. They already knew what was coming. They called it Operation Nothing But Net, and the scale of it honestly feels unreal. Agents were scattered across 11 states from New York to Nevada, piecing together what they described as one of the most complex financial and sports integrity cases in modern history. This wasn't just guys in suits reading paperwork. According to the reports that later surfaced, agents logged thousands of hours of surveillance, hidden cameras, wiretaps, burner phone tracing, and even tailing suspects leaving private poker rooms in Vegas. They had over 3,000 recorded informant calls, with some coming from people inside NBA circles. Yeah, that means players, assistants, even front office staff quietly feeding intel, hoping to save themselves from federal charges. And this part is crazy. The FBI's cyber team actually traced cryptocurrency transactions used in the betting networks. That's how they connected the dots between offshore gambling sites, mafia-backed accounts, and encrypted wallets tied to US-based consultants. Those consultants, by the way, were the middlemen, the people who took info from NBA locker rooms and turned them into multi-million-dollar betting schemes. What the FBI built wasn't just a case, it was a blueprint. Every message, every payment, and every suspicious injury update had a timestamp. They weren't trying to bust a few gamblers. They wanted an airtight federal case that could survive appeals, defense teams, and public backlash. Well, paperwork doesn't really show the chaos behind it, but to understand how this mess actually worked, we've got to go into full detail on how they operated the schemes. The feds broke it down into two machines working side by side, the insider betting network and the underground poker empire, both feeding each other money and protection like a business partnership from hell. The insider betting ring was the cleaner-looking one, and it all happened between late 2022 and early 2024. There were 7 teams showing suspicious line movements: the Charlotte Hornets, Orlando Magic, Portland Trail Blazers, Los Angeles Lakers, Toronto Raptors, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Miami Heat, all with betting spikes that hit seconds after internal team reports were filed. Then, there was the poker ring that stretched from 2019 to 2025, hidden behind what looked like luxury celebrity poker nights, but underneath the champagne and designer suits, it was pure organized crime. These weren't your average games. The tables were built with X-ray sensors, hidden cameras, and rigged automatic shufflers that could be remotely manipulated mid-deal. Every location screamed money, from Hamptons mansions to Vegas sky suites, Miami penthouses, and Manhattan hotel ballrooms. The organizers had a nickname for their setup: the face card table. NBA players who were the face cards were invited as bait. They were the celebrity magnets that made wealthy businessmen and investors who were called the fish, so desperate to buy a seat.
The scheme targeted victims known as, quote, fish, who were often lured to participate in these rigged games by the chance to play alongside former professional athletes who were known as, quote, face cards.
Those fish thought they were playing alongside heroes. They didn't realize they were swimming into a trap. Chauncey Billups and Damon Jones were allegedly used as the public faces, the ones who made it all look legit.
The so-called face cards included the defendant Chauncey Billups, who at the time of the scheme was a former NBA player and is currently the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers.
Once the buy-ins hit the table, the house was already ahead. They skimmed 10 to 20% of every pot, pocketing millions under the guise of event fees. By the time the Fed started tracing it, there was over $7 million in confirmed victim losses and $20 million laundered through shell companies, crypto exchanges, and even fake charity funds. And the muscle was straight from New York's darkest lineage: Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese. The poker empire was mafia-backed from day one, complete with enforcers who handled disputes the old-fashioned way. Court filings mention threats, property damage, and at least one armed robbery, where a losing player was cornered in a Manhattan parking garage and stripped of $500,000 worth of jewelry. That was the moment the FBI realized this wasn't a gambling problem, it was a criminal infrastructure. The wildest part is that both operations weren't competing. They were connected. The poker games generated the dirty money. The insider bets cleaned it. Win on the court, lose at the table, everything balanced on paper. It was elegant in the worst way possible. Federal prosecutors didn't hold back. The indictments listed wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, illegal gambling, and obstruction of justice. Each count carried years, sometimes decades, in potential prison time. In total, over 30 defendants were named across multiple indictments, with the NBA figures, Billups, Rozier, and Jones, sitting right at the center of it all. If convicted on the top charges, some of these guys could be facing 20 to 30 years behind bars. For the NBA, this wasn't just about punishing a few players. It was about protecting the league's image, and maybe even its survival. Because there have been too many cases of players, even outside of the NBA, who have been involved with organized crime and gangs. And you can't help but wonder how deep the connection between crime and sports goes. You've probably heard of the 1919 Black Sox scandal, where 8 Chicago White Sox players were accused of taking bribes to throw the World Series. That one didn't just wreck a team, it nearly destroyed baseball. The fans were furious, sponsors pulled out, and the league had to invent the position of commissioner just to convince people the game could be trusted again. Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis came in like a one-man cleanup crew and laid down the law. Fast forward nearly a century and switch to the NBA itself, and the Tim Donaghy case happened. He was a referee who admitted to betting on games he officiated. Think about that. The guy controlling the whistle, calling the fouls, literally altering momentum, had money riding on the outcomes. It wasn't just corruption. It was betrayal baked into the system. But the story doesn't stop with betting. It's also about the company you keep. Because if you look deeper into sports history, especially basketball, there's a darker thread that's always lingered around the edges. Take Javaris Crittenton. He was once a promising young guard with the Lakers, but he ended up convicted of manslaughter and tied to the Mansfield Crips in Atlanta. His story wasn't about point shaving or betting. It was about how easily the wrong influences can pull an athlete off course. It's tragic, but it shows how close the worlds of sports, crime, and power can get. The same goes for Zach Randolph and Tony Allen, both players whose names popped up in police reports and investigations involving their connections with one of the most notorious American gangs of all time, the Gangster Disciples. And then there's Nikola Pekovic, the Montenegro-born big man who once dominated under the rim in Minnesota. After he retired, his name started surfacing in European news outlets, linking him to figures in the Serbian and Montenegrin underworld. When you stack all of these stories side by side, a pattern starts to form. That's why this current scandal hits so hard. It's not just another headline, it's the result of a century's worth of warnings the sports world never really listened to. And maybe that's what makes this one different. Because this time, the game isn't just fighting gamblers or referees or one rogue player, it's fighting its own reflection. And with all this, NBA legends and players have reacted, and boy, it's messy. Draymond Green was one of the first to speak up, and his take was measured. He said it's a tough time for everyone involved, for the league and for the fans, but he was clear. This isn't about punishing the NBA for partnering with gambling companies.
But I'm not going to sit here and be like, man, y'all partner with a gambling company, you open a can of worms. Like, that can of worms can be open with partnering with gambling companies or not.
Shaq, on the other hand, didn't hold back. You know Shaq. He called it what it is and reminded everyone that not all money is good money.
All money ain't good money. So if you're making $9 million and you're dealing in certain things, like how much more do you need?
Then there's Kenny Smith, who took a slightly different angle. Gambling is an addiction, he said. An addiction doesn't care if you're a player, a coach, or a Hall of Famer. That's what needs to be fixed first.
We have to realize gambling is an addiction. So the addiction of it is what makes you make illogical decisions.
And of course, Charles Barkley countered that and added his 2 cents. True to form, he called the whole thing greed, plain and simple.
These dudes are stupid. Why are they stupid?
Under no circumstances can you fix basketball games. Under no circumstances.
The fallout from this scandal hit fast, and it hit hard. Players' reputations were shredded overnight, and people who were once role models, mentors, and fan favorites were now at the center of one of the darkest chapters in NBA history. The league and the NBPA scrambled to respond, releasing statements about full cooperation with the FBI and DOJ, while emphasizing that everyone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But let's be real. Once the story went public, social media exploded. Fans debated in real time, and the questions weren't just legal, they were moral. Who can you trust in a locker room anymore? The economic impact was just as brutal. Ticket sales took a hit immediately. The Portland Trail Blazers season opener saw about 10% of seats unsold. Merchandise suffered too. Terry Rozier jerseys were down 15% in October alone. And for the gambling partners, they saw their stocks dip 3 to 7% as investors were worried about public perception and regulatory scrutiny. Looking ahead, the NBA is facing a crossroads. We should expect stricter federal oversight, potentially even a new agency dedicated to policing player and coach gambling. Leagues may move to total bans on any betting by insiders, coupled with financial audits and mandatory communication checks. The relationships between sports leagues and betting companies could shift dramatically, and broadcast integrations may be pulled back. Basically, the NBA might be stepping into a world where gambling exists, but it's far more controlled, far less cozy, and far less profitable for insiders who used to play fast and loose. And as this whole drama closes, for now, fans, analysts, and players alike are left with one stark truth. The game might never look the same, and trust, once broken, is the hardest thing to rebuild. If you thought this story was wild, hit that like button and subscribe, because the NBA isn't done shocking us yet. And I really want to know, which part of this scandal blew your mind the most? And make sure to turn on notifications, because we'll be covering every twist, every new arrest, and every jaw-dropping detail as it unfolds. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next.